Have you ever heard of a country where nearly half of all marriages begin with a daytime kidnapping? A place where a girl on her way to school can be lifted into a car in front of dozens of witnesses, and just a few hours later be called the wife of a man she has never loved. A place where the price of a wedding can be calculated in 100 sheep. This is not a story from the Middle Ages. This is present-day Kyrgyzstan, a small nation tucked between the towering mountains of Central Asia, half a world away from the United States, yet reflecting a question that feels uncomfortably close to every society. When the economy hits rock bottom, what happens to personal freedom? For many American viewers, Central Asia is a blank space on the map. Not Paris. Not Tokyo. Not Dubai. But inside that blank space are realities that make you question what century we are truly living in. A landlocked country surrounded by mountains, where winters can plunge to -20 degrees Celsius, and in summer, people still drive their livestock up to the high pastures just as their ancestors did for thousands of years. A nation that was once part of the Soviet Union, and then, after 1991, was forced to stand suddenly on its own fragile economic feet. Today, we are not just talking about poverty. We are talking about how poverty can redefine honor, love, and even the human body. You will encounter stories that, if they happened in the United States, would dominate every headline. Every year, thousands of women in Kyrgyzstan are abducted for forced marriage. The laws exist. Prison sentences exist. But village culture and community pressure can be stronger than any courtroom. Once a girl has been taken to the groom's house, many families believe she now belongs to him. As if a woman's honor can be decided in a single afternoon. And that is not the only shocking reality. In this country, doctors once discovered a young woman who needed surgery because her stomach contained a 4-kilogram mass of hair. A habit that seemed harmless turned into a medical nightmare. You will also hear about a man who could pull an entire car using his teeth, forcing doctors to take X-rays just to make sure he had not implanted metal into his jaw. It may sound like a chain of sensational stories. But behind each one lies a complex social structure. When average annual income is only a few $1,000s, when nearly 1/3 of the economy depends on remittances sent home by migrant workers in Russia, when job opportunities are scarce and the future feels uncertain, personal choices are no longer purely choices. They become survival strategies. For an American audience, where the idea of individual liberty is the foundation of almost every political and social debate, the story of Kyrgyzstan is not just about a distant land. It is a mirror. How sustainable is freedom when its economic foundation begins to crack? How can women defend their rights when communities believe tradition outweighs the law? And where does a society go when its younger generation longs for change, but remains bound by the weight of its ancestors? You will see festivals where horsemen on horseback fight over the carcass of a goat to the roar of a cheering crowd. You will step inside traditional nomadic yurts, where a family's wealth is not stored in a bank account, but in livestock. 1 sheep can equal the price of a smartphone. 10 sheep can be traded for a cow. 100 sheep can seal a marriage. Meanwhile, smartphones, social media, and the tide of globalization continue to flow into every valley. 2 worlds existing side by side. And then you may begin to ask, is Kyrgyzstan a backward nation, or simply a society struggling to transform too quickly while its foundations are still fragile? What makes this story worth telling is not just the shocking details. It is the contradiction. On one side are customs that outrage the world. On the other are people striving to preserve their identity, working hard, loving their families in the only ways they know. A nation can be poor in money yet rich in tradition. A society can be criticized from the outside, yet inside, quiet efforts for change are taking root. In the minutes ahead, we will not simply list the strange or the exotic. We will dig into the why. Why a country rich in gold and hydropower still struggles. Why laws banning bride kidnapping exist, yet the practice continues. Why millions leave their homeland to work abroad, and how that reshapes the structure of family itself. Kyrgyzstan is not just a shocking headline. It is a lesson about the connection between economics and culture, between poverty and human rights, between tradition and modernity. And perhaps, in looking at their story, we will begin to look more honestly at our own. To understand why Kyrgyzstan has become one of the most economically fragile countries in Central Asia, we have to begin with the map. Not with politics. Not with culture. But with geography. Kyrgyzstan is a landlocked country. For many Americans, that might sound like a minor detail from a textbook. But in a globalized economy, being landlocked means every trade route must pass through someone else's territory. There is no national seaport. No direct maritime shipping lines. No open gateway to the ocean connecting freely to global markets. Every exported container must transit across another country's land. Every imported supply depends on the political goodwill and stability of its neighbors. On the map, Kyrgyzstan is wedged between larger and more powerful states. To the north is Kazakhstan. To the east is China. To the west is Uzbekistan. To the south is Tajikistan. There is no ocean as an escape route. No independent trade corridor. Every regional shift can immediately shake an economy that is already fragile. But the challenge is not just the lack of sea access. Nearly 80% of Kyrgyzstan's territory is mountainous. The vast ranges of the Tian Shan stretch across the country like a massive wall, dividing valleys, separating communities, and making infrastructure painfully expensive to build. Roads twist through narrow passes. Steep mountain routes are vulnerable to landslides. Long winters bury entire regions under snow and ice, isolating communities for months at a time. Put this into an American context. Imagine the entire U.S. interstate highway system replaced with narrow mountain roads, prone to collapse and frequently shut down by snowstorms. Imagine a business trying to move goods while calculating transportation costs that are several times higher simply because of terrain. This is not just a transportation problem. It is a problem of opportunity. Geography does not only shape trade routes. It shapes economic structure. With most of the land covered by mountains and high plateaus, arable land in Kyrgyzstan is limited. Agriculture exists, but it cannot scale into vast industrial production like the broad plains of the United States or Europe. Heavy industry struggles as well, because transporting raw materials in and finished goods out is simply too costly. When logistics costs rise, profit margins shrink. When profits shrink, investment slows. During the Soviet era, Kyrgyzstan did not have to worry as much about these constraints. It was part of a larger system, where railways and factories were coordinated from the center. The economy functioned through internal specialization across the Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Kyrgyzstan suddenly had to define itself in a fiercely competitive world. It lost the protective network. It lost guaranteed markets. It lost financial support from Moscow. From being a link in the supply chain of a superpower, it became a small nation forced to carve out its own survival. And when you have no coastline, no strong infrastructure, and no diversified industrial base, every step forward feels heavy. Dependency did not disappear. It simply shifted. Millions of Kyrgyz citizens left their homeland to work in Russia. Remittances became one of the country's most important sources of income. This created a fragile loop. If Russia's economy slows, if immigration policies tighten, if geopolitical tensions escalate, Kyrgyzstan feels the impact immediately. A country where nearly 1/3 of GDP depends on money sent home by workers abroad is a country placing its future in external hands. And when those external factors shift, instability does not remain on economic charts. It enters living rooms and kitchens. Picture a father working in Moscow, sending money back to his wife and children in a mountain village in Kyrgyzstan. When borders tighten or jobs become scarce, that flow of money stops. The family cuts expenses. Children may leave school. Decisions like early marriage or irregular migration begin to look less like choices and more like survival strategies. Geography also locks Kyrgyzstan into a delicate political balance. Positioned between regional powers, it must navigate foreign policy with extreme caution. China is a major trading partner. Russia is the primary destination for migrant labor. Other Central Asian neighbors influence water resources and border security. A single strategic misstep can further destabilize an already vulnerable economy. This sense of confinement is not only physical. It is psychological. When a country is surrounded by mountains and dependent on corridors controlled by others, development vision is often shaped by immediate realities. People adapt by leaning on traditional models rather than risking investment in uncertain new sectors. And yet, geography is not purely a curse. The towering mountains create breathtaking landscapes, tourism potential, and vast hydropower resources. But turning potential into sustainable growth requires capital, transparent governance, and political stability. When these elements do not align, resources remain trapped on paper. In a world where coastal nations can access global markets with relative ease, Kyrgyzstan pays a premium for every ton it exports. In an era where flexible supply chains are the engine of growth, it remains constrained by snow-covered passes and trade routes dependent on neighboring states. Geography is not absolute destiny. But in the case of Kyrgyzstan, it is a rigid frame that shapes nearly every economic and social decision. From the necessity of labor migration to the persistence of tight-knit rural community structures, much can be traced back to its position on the map. A nation locked by mountains and cut off from the sea does not only struggle with transport costs. It struggles with a sense of enclosure. And when opportunity is narrowed by terrain, society adapts in ways that outsiders may struggle to understand. That is where we must begin if we want to understand the controversial customs, the difficult choices, and the contradictions that define Kyrgyzstan today. Before we speak about culture, we must look at the map. Before we judge a society, we must understand the mountains that have surrounded it for centuries. When a society is constrained by geography and economic opportunity becomes scarce, individual choices slowly transform into collective survival mechanisms. In Kyrgyzstan, poverty is not measured only by per capita income. It is measured by how people define honor, marriage, and the position of women within the family. For many American viewers, marriage is built on love and personal consent. But in many rural regions of Kyrgyzstan, marriage has long functioned as an economic structure as well. It is tied to property, livestock, family reputation, and the continuation of lineage. When the average income is only a few $1,000s a year and stable job opportunities are limited, the cost of a wedding becomes a real burden. A traditional wedding can consume the equivalent of several months, even an entire year, of labor. The groom's family must prepare a bride price, host large celebrations, and provide gifts to both extended families. In that context, bride kidnapping can emerge as a shortcut to reduce expenses. Instead of negotiating and organizing a formal ceremony, a group of young men may intercept a girl, take her to the groom's house, and pressure her to accept the marriage. Many outsiders see only cruelty. And indeed, there are cases of violence, coercion, and deep trauma. But if we stop at outrage, we miss the social mechanism behind it. In a community where collective honor is placed above individual rights, once a girl is taken to the groom's home, it is often treated as a fait accompli. Her family may fear gossip, fear losing face, fear that she will struggle to remarry if she returns home. Poverty makes every decision harsher. When families depend on remittances from migrant labor, when fathers or brothers work abroad, the protective structure within the community weakens. A young woman may lack direct guardianship. Pressure to conform intensifies because everyone understands that prolonged conflict means greater financial strain and instability. Kyrgyzstan has outlawed bride kidnapping for years, with significant prison sentences on the books. But laws are only as strong as their enforcement. In remote mountain regions, where communities are tight-knit and family networks overlap, reporting a kidnapping can mean standing against the entire surrounding social web. When courts are far away and incomes are low, pursuing a legal case is not an easy option. Poverty also creates another pressure, less visible but persistent and powerful: the pressure to have sons. In a rural economy heavily reliant on physical labor and livestock herding, sons are seen as future labor power. They will tend the herds, protect property, and carry on the family name. Daughters, once married, typically move to their husband's household, meaning the natal family loses a working member. When a woman gives birth to her first daughter, the family may hope the next child will be a boy. If the second is also a girl, hope can turn into anxiety. By the third, it may become real pressure. In conditions of poverty, every child is not only a source of joy, but also an economic calculation. Who will generate income? Who will remain to care for aging parents? Here, tradition is not merely cultural inheritance. It is a response to the absence of a strong social safety net. In the United States, the elderly can rely on social security systems and pensions. In many rural parts of Kyrgyzstan, the most reliable guarantee for old age remains one's children, especially sons. When public welfare is weak, the family becomes the only insurance. And when that insurance feels fragile, the desire for a male child becomes almost inevitable. Poverty also shapes rituals and systems of value exchange. In many nomadic communities, wealth is not stored in banks, but in herds of sheep, cattle, and horses. A single sheep can function as a unit of value. When marriage is calculated in dozens or hundreds of animals, it becomes a tangible economic transaction. In that framework, cutting costs by bypassing formal wedding negotiations may be viewed as financially rational, even though the social consequences are profound. Beyond marriage, long-term economic strain can influence psychological expressions. Mental health experts have noted that behaviors such as compulsive hair eating, obsessive disorders, or extreme stress reactions often appear in environments marked by deprivation and pressure. When the future feels uncertain and opportunities are limited, stress does not disappear. It accumulates in the body and the mind. In Kyrgyzstan, there have been cases of teenagers requiring surgery because their stomachs were filled with hair from years of chewing and swallowing it. This phenomenon is not unique to one country, but it reflects an environment where psychological support and mental health care are not prioritized. When healthcare budgets are limited and focus centers on basic survival needs, silent mental struggles can be overlooked until they become medical crises. It is important not to equate poverty with backwardness. Many Kyrgyz citizens are fully aware of the controversies surrounding traditional practices. The younger generation, especially those who study in cities or abroad, are questioning old norms. They use social media. They see the wider world. They compare. But social change does not happen through awareness alone. It requires an economic foundation strong enough to allow individuals to say no without fearing exclusion from their community. When a young woman has stable employment, independent income, and meaningful legal protection, she is far more likely to refuse a forced marriage. When families do not rely entirely on sons for security in old age, gender pressure eases. When economic opportunities expand, traditions gradually lose their survival function. That is why, to understand why controversial customs persist, we cannot look only at morality. We must examine economic structure. Poverty does not automatically create violence, but it can harden traditional systems. When resources are scarce, communities cling tightly to what they believe helped their ancestors survive. Kyrgyzstan today stands between two worlds. On one side is a heritage shaped by nomadic history and the post-Soviet transition. On the other is the modern expectation of individual rights and gender equality. Between these forces lies an economic reality still marked by limitations. When the financial foundation is not strong enough to support a smooth transition, the tension between old and new intensifies. Poverty is not an excuse for injustice. But if change is the goal, understanding how poverty has shaped behavior is the starting point. In Kyrgyzstan, many customs did not emerge from malice. They grew from fear of scarcity, from the need to secure family survival in an uncertain environment. And only when that environment changes will those customs truly have the chance to fade into the past. When a little-known country appears in international media, its image is often framed by the most shocking stories available. For Kyrgyzstan, that may mean headlines about bride kidnapping, poverty, political unrest, or strange incidents that go viral on social media. But what causes the world to misunderstand is not only the events themselves. It is the way they are told, and the way they are received. In the age of algorithms and click-driven headlines, the more unusual a story is, the faster it spreads. A man who can pull a car with his teeth quickly becomes a symbol of an entire nation's strangeness. A rare medical case like compulsive hair eating is seen as proof of a dysfunctional society. But reality is far more complex. First, extraordinary stories do not represent an entire population. Every country has individuals who break norms, rare phenomena that shock the public, and incidents that dominate the news cycle. In the United States, reports of school shootings or extremist movements do not define the whole of American society. Yet when it comes to a small and distant country like Kyrgyzstan, a few striking images can easily become an all-encompassing label. Misunderstanding also comes from stripping events of context. When people hear about a festival where horsemen on horseback fight over a goat carcass in the game of cockboru, they may feel shocked or disturbed. But if we look deeper into the nomadic history of Central Asia, we see an activity rooted in horsemanship, collective strength, and ancient military tradition. On the vast steppes, horses were once essential for survival. Equestrian games were not merely entertainment. They trained coordination, endurance, and combat skill. Without historical context, it becomes easy to label what is unfamiliar as barbaric. But difference does not equal lack of civilization. It reflects the survival conditions of a community shaped by specific circumstances. Similarly, the nomadic lifestyle that still exists in parts of Kyrgyzstan's mountain regions is often seen as a sign of underdevelopment. Images of traditional round yurts, herds moving with the seasons, and livestock used as units of exchange instead of cash can make outsiders feel as though time has reversed. Yet for those living within this system, it is an economic model adapted to terrain and climate. When winters are long and grazing land shifts with altitude, seasonal migration is not backward. It is a strategy to maximize limited resources. Another misunderstanding comes from assuming that every tradition reflects unanimous social approval. When media reports that a significant portion of marriages involve bride kidnapping, many outsiders may conclude that all women in Kyrgyzstan accept or support the practice. The truth is far more layered. Some older women may view it as tradition. Many younger women strongly oppose it. Some families quietly work to protect their daughters. Kyrgyz society is not a single, uniform block. It is in transition. Younger generations have greater access to higher education, wider internet connectivity, and stronger global links. Debates about women's rights, legal reform, and the role of tradition take place not only in parliament, but also on social media and university campuses. When international coverage focuses only on negative incidents, it overlooks the internal struggle unfolding within the country itself. Misunderstanding also stems from how poverty is perceived. There is a tendency to equate poverty with lack of ability or lack of ambition. But economic hardship in Kyrgyzstan largely stems from geography and the post-Soviet transition, not from a lack of effort among its people. Many families work tirelessly. Many young people pursue education and seek opportunities abroad, sending money home to support relatives. Remittances are a critical source of income, but they also reflect resilience, sacrifice, and determination. A nation may be poor in per capita income, but that does not automatically mean it is poor in intellect or culture. Kyrgyzstan has a rich tradition of epic poetry, folk music, and handcrafted art. Felt carpets made by hand, decorated with traditional patterns, are not merely tourist products. They carry collective memory and skills passed down through generations. When international media reduces the country to low GDP figures, it ignores a vital dimension of cultural identity. Information gaps deepen the problem. Many Americans and Europeans have never directly met someone from Kyrgyzstan. Their understanding comes from short videos or passing articles. Without personal experience, perception is shaped by the most dramatic stories available. This creates a feedback loop. Shocking content spreads further, reinforcing the initial stereotype. Yet Kyrgyzstan itself is reshaping how it is seen. Ecotourism, mountain trekking, nature exploration, and immersive nomadic experiences are drawing international attention. Lush valleys, crystal clear lakes, and sweeping high plateaus present a different image, one less sensational, but equally powerful. Travelers who visit often discover that life here is not defined solely by controversy. The key is to distinguish between criticism and understanding. Criticizing practices that violate human rights is necessary. But if criticism stops there, without examining causes and context, it risks becoming moral simplification. Every society carries contradictions. Kyrgyzstan is no exception. What leads the world to misunderstand often lies in seeing a single fragment and mistaking it for the entire picture. One kidnapping case, one rare medical condition, one controversial festival may reflect a facet of society. But they cannot replace the complexity of millions of people living, working, and hoping for a better future. When we look at Kyrgyzstan, the real challenge is not accepting difference. It is resisting the temptation to simplify. A country is not the sum of its most shocking headlines. It is the long story of geography, history, economics, and real human lives. Only when we slow down, look deeper, and ask harder questions does the fuller picture begin to emerge. When the world looks at Kyrgyzstan, it often sees the shocking details first. But there is another Kyrgyzstan that exists in parallel, quieter and far less discussed. It is a Kyrgyzstan of dignity, resilient identity, and people who are quietly reshaping their future in their own way. The first truth rarely told is that most people here do not see themselves as victims of geography or history. They see life as a continuous act of adaptation. For centuries, their ancestors lived among towering mountains, moving with the seasons to find better pastures for their livestock. Nomadic life was not just an economic system. It was a philosophy of survival. When conditions changed, they adjusted. When winters were harsh, they prepared. When resources were scarce, they relied on community. The traditional round tent, known as the yurt, is not simply temporary shelter. It is a symbol of flexibility. Its wooden frame can be dismantled and rebuilt. Its felt covering keeps warmth in during winter and cool air circulating in summer. In a modern world where homes are often tied to permanence, the yurt represents a different mindset. Home is not a fixed root in the ground. It is a space that moves with life itself. Another truth rarely mentioned is that literacy rates in Kyrgyzstan are relatively high compared to many countries with similar income levels. The educational legacy of the Soviet era left behind a solid academic foundation. Many young Kyrgyz speak multiple languages, including Russian, and increasingly English. They access the internet, enroll in online courses, and follow global conversations. Even in remote valleys, smartphone screens glow just as they do in major cities around the world. A second overlooked reality is the role of women in economic and cultural life beyond the negative headlines. Alongside controversial customs, there are countless women running felt carpet workshops, managing small businesses, participating in non-governmental organizations, and advocating for gender equality. Traditional felt making is not merely craft. It is a vital source of income for many families. Each pattern and cut carries meaning, telling stories of nature, tribe, and ancestral memory. In cities like Bishkek, a new middle class is slowly emerging. Cafes, co-working spaces, and startup initiatives are becoming more visible. Young people organize discussions about social reform, the role of law, and integration into the global economy. The scale may still be modest, but the direction is clear. Change is happening, quietly but persistently. A third truth seldom told is the depth of national pride. Kyrgyzstan holds a long epic storytelling tradition, most famously the Epic of Manas. Oral storytellers can memorize and recite tens of thousands of lines, bringing history and national values to life through their voices. In an era of fragmented attention spans and short-form content, sustaining such a tradition is remarkable. It shows a people deeply aware not only of their present, but of their past. Another overlooked reality is the country's natural beauty. Isikkul, one of the world's largest saline lakes nestled among mountains, serves as both a domestic retreat and an international destination. Vast green plateaus, glacier, and untouched valleys offer enormous potential for ecotourism. While the tourism industry is not yet as developed as in more famous destinations, it is steadily becoming an important source of income and new employment. There is also a powerful spirit of community that often goes unnoticed. In mountain villages, when a family organizes a wedding or a funeral, the entire community participates. People contribute food, labor, and time. In an economy with limited financial resources, solidarity becomes the most valuable asset. This does not erase existing problems, but it reveals a social structure where individuals are not entirely alone. Kyrgyzstan must also balance complex geopolitical influences. Positioned between regional powers, it must navigate foreign relations carefully. This requires political flexibility. Despite internal unrest in the past, civil society and independent media still operate and play a monitoring role. Compared to some neighboring states, the space for public discussion remains relatively open. That openness is essential for any meaningful reform. Another truth rarely acknowledged is that the desire for change comes not only from external pressure but from within. Many families today invest more in their daughters' education. Campaigns promoting women's rights and combating domestic violence are organized by Kyrgyz citizens themselves. Change may be gradual, but it is unfolding step by step. In this broader picture, Kyrgyzstan is not merely a land of controversial customs. It is a place where contradictions are negotiated every day. Between tradition and modernity. Between mountain isolation and global connectivity. Between nomadic memory and aspirations for integration. The truth seldom told is that a nation cannot be defined solely by its worst headlines. Kyrgyzstan faces real challenges that demand solutions. Yet it also possesses significant internal strengths. Education, cultural heritage, natural beauty, and communal solidarity all form a foundation for future transformation. If we look only through the lens of sensational headlines, we miss the deeper story. A story of resilience, of adaptation, of people determined to redefine how their country is seen. And perhaps the greatest untold truth is this: Kyrgyzstan is not standing still. It is changing, slowly but unmistakably, in ways visible only to those willing to look long enough. As the journey of exploring Kyrgyzstan comes to an end, what lingers may not be the most shocking details. Not the statistics about forced marriages. Not the strange medical story. Not the fierce festivals on horseback. What remains is a quieter, but far more unsettling question. How well do we truly understand another country before we rush to judge it? Kyrgyzstan is not a paradise. But neither is it a sensational news headline in miniature. It is a society struggling with historical legacies, geographic constraints, and the demands of the modern world. Between high mountain ranges and deep valleys, its people are seeking ways to balance tradition and change, community and individuality, survival and aspiration. For many American audiences, customs such as bride kidnapping may be unacceptable. And rightly so, any act that violates individual freedom must be taken seriously. But if we stop at outrage, we miss something more important. These practices do not exist in a vacuum. They are connected to economic structures, to fears of poverty, and to a still fragile social safety system. A landlocked country, largely mountainous, once dependent on a superpower and then forced to restructure its economy in a fiercely competitive world. When we look at that picture, we understand that every social decision is shaped by circumstance. This does not mean accepting everything as it is, but acknowledging that change requires more than moral appeals. It requires economic foundations, education, and real opportunities. There is a paradox worth reflecting on. While the developed world often speaks about individual freedom, that freedom depends heavily on economic stability. When you have a stable job, an effective legal system, and a functioning social welfare network, you have more room to choose. But when income is unstable and the future uncertain, choices narrow. In that narrow space, tradition tends to take deeper root because it offers a familiar sense of security. Kyrgyzstan therefore becomes a mirror reflecting a broader truth. No society exists separate from its material conditions. Culture is not only the product of belief, it is also a response to circumstance. When conditions change, culture will change as well, but that process is often slower than the outside world desires. What is noteworthy is that within the valleys and cities of Kyrgyzstan, the debate about the future is far from silent. The younger generation has greater access to higher education, uses social media, follows international news, and questions its role in society. Many women engage in business, the arts, and social activism. Efforts to reform laws, raise awareness, and promote gender equality come not only from international pressure, but from the country's own citizens. Change may not unfold as quickly as some hope. But it is unfolding. And this leads to another reflection. Perhaps the fairest thing we can do when looking at another nation is not to place it into a fixed category, but to recognize that it is in the midst of a process. Kyrgyzstan today carries within it an ancient nomadic heritage while simultaneously connecting to the global internet. It organizes traditional festivals while sending its children to study abroad. It confronts serious challenges while nurturing new dreams. That coexistence may create tension, but it is also the driving force of social evolution. When we look back on this journey, perhaps the important question is not whether Kyrgyzstan resembles our own standards. Rather, it is what we learn from its story. Perhaps it is a lesson in resilience under harsh conditions. Perhaps it is a reminder that freedom and rights must be supported by a strong economic foundation. Or perhaps, more simply, it is a lesson in humility when approaching another culture. In an increasingly connected world, geographic distance is no longer the greatest barrier. The greater barrier is misunderstanding. When we focus only on the most striking details, we overlook depth. But when we take the time to listen, to learn, and to ask questions, the picture becomes far richer. Kyrgyzstan is not only a country locked by mountains. It is also a country gradually opening its doors to the world. And perhaps the final reflection is this: every nation has its darker and brighter chapters. What determines the future is not whether problems exist, but how those problems are confronted. If we leave this story with curiosity instead of prejudice, with a desire to understand rather than merely to criticize, then the journey has been meaningful. Because understanding does not begin with answers. It begins with the willingness to see the world as larger than our own experience.